The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Business Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericabusiness.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to Strategies for Financial Survival with Michael Figueroa. When financial adversity hits, and it very well may hit you, it's those that educate themselves and use their skills that will survive, no matter what field you're in. Now, here's your host, Michael Figueroa.
Welcome, everyone, to Strategies for Financial Survival. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Bill Anastopoulos. Bill goes by the nickname Billy A. Billy's been in the hard money lending, asset equity lending business, I believe, since at least 1985. And he's an extremely experienced person in raising millions and millions of dollars for different people who borrow money to buy foreclosures, bankruptcy properties, trustee sales. He'll give you more detail on the type of funds that he raises for and people, what they use the money for in a minute. So we're going to go over today what it takes to be able to qualify, to be able to get someone like Bill to be able to place your loan request with an investor and make sure that it could pass and be successful. So, Bill, let me start out with having you give a little resume of your background and what you've done, and after that we'll go into some questions for people.
Well, Mike, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show, and it's a true honor. And if some of the folks don't know me, I've a long time ago, Mike and I crossed paths, and he's been a great friend and a mentor to me. And I've really focused on private lending for a number of years. And so that's basically where I started. I've been in lending for a number of years. I did a lot of what we call conforming loans, single family, FHA, VA type lending for a number of years, have a pretty good feel for that. Always was attracted towards private lending, so I'm kind of a creative private hard money lending. And as you mentioned, Mike, my nickname is Billy A, so I went out and got a website address that says billya.com, BILLYW.com, and I'm with Gold Coast Mortgage, and my phone number, in case any of the folks have any questions down the road that want to talk or brainstorm with me, I'm all about giving great information without obligation, is 520-299-4878. So, Mike, again, thank you. It's an honor to be with you and on your show. And I'll just let you go ahead and take it away and guide me on which way you feel we'd like to take the interview today.
Very good. So we've had a couple of shows dealing with how to find a property to buy, real estate agents that you would be dealing with, certain renovation experts. And so when people have gotten to the point where either they have a property, which is not the way to go, and then look for money, or they, in my opinion, need to line up a financing source in advance so that they know when they go out in the marketplace to look for a property that they know that they will have the financing available to pick up the specific type of property that they're hunting for. So in regards to that, So let's say I am going to go out, look at trustee sale properties. I want to buy these type of properties or fix up properties. And I come to you. What are the main questions that you're going to ask me and things that you need from me in order to say, here is what I can do, here are the terms and conditions of what I can do, and move forward with it so that when I do find the property, you're able to fund it. So give everybody a little outline on what it
on
takes.
that part. Well, historically, Mike, as you know, when you and I started back in the 80s, although you were doing it a little bit longer than myself, the old rule of thumb, as we talk about it, Mike, has always been that 65 to 70% loan to value. That's always seemed to be historically what the marketplace has designed for asset-based lending. We always start out with, what is value? You and I go back and forth on that, and we talk about the old world and new world and all the in-between that's happened to us in the last, 5 to 10 years. And it's been extreme, So I think once we can all agree on what value is, and that's a whole discussion depending on where we want to go with that. The old rule of thumb was that usually appraisals had a 10% error. There was a 10% historically if you market a property by time you pay a listing commission and a selling commission and closing costs for folks to get a loan these days, you pretty much ate up another 10%. And then the loss of an investor's funds tended to be give or take a 10% to go through the legal process of maybe procuring or perfecting a property that was in default. So the old rule of thumb that's kind of still out there is that 65 to 70% loan to value. I want to reiterate, though, in whatever industry it is, it really boils back down to relationships and track records. And Mike, you would have to admit or agree that once you have a great relationship with an investor, a lender, and there's somewhat of a track record, sometimes these rules are bent, sometimes these rules are a little bit eased. But give or take, if you can kind of think of a stool, you need to have at least three legs. And, and when it comes to a fix and flip, we're always looking at the property. We're always looking at what kind of equity is, quote unquote, the flipper or the entrepreneur, maybe is a better word, who's went out and found that property or is looking for that property. And then ultimately, what's the exit strategy? So we need to have those three legs covered to make sure that the stool sits and it sits well.
Okay, so let's say someone wants to do a loan request. How important as one issue is the resume of the borrower? What do you want to see from the borrower in order to say, I'm willing to do a transaction with you as part one?
No, I think that's a great place to start. And I think just like in any industry, and real estate is a commodity, just like in any commodity, there's a wholesale value, there's a retail value, and there's all different types of value. When you ask an appraiser to give you a value, if you say, I need it less than a 30-day marketing period, that value tends to be something different than maybe something that could be marketed for 6 months. So when you take a look at that, when you're really looking at that entrepreneur, that person who's going out and looking for potential fix and flip properties. And as you know, Mike, that's a really hard part of the model, finding them and then being able to do enough analysis on them to make sure that once there is enough fix up that there's some profit left at the end of it. So I think when you're looking at a borrower, a lot of times you're saying, okay, are you new to this game? Have you been around? If you've been around, great. Can you give me some addresses? Can you give me some before and after pictures? And I think a lot of times when I'm working with potential clients, they may have done 1 or 2 or 3, and I'll ask them, do you have a resume or some kind of track record? And the answer is no. And that's when I go back to them. I say, tell you what, I've got permission from some other people that are ahead of you in the journey. I'm going to email you what I think would be helpful to you, whether you work with me or anybody else. But let's put together, quote unquote, a little portfolio, a little resume, a little track record. And that's basically what I typically end up starting with them. And by helping them package themselves, or quote unquote put together a resume, they're helping me work with my investors, but they're also, more importantly, helping themselves create a baseline for them to start in the future and to do more and more of these. Because a lot of times, Mike, as you well know, they may have had a great relationship and still do with one particular lender. It could be a family member, it could be a family member's friend, but at some certain point, they end up either growing out of that relationship or changing it. And I think that's where that's what having a little bit of a resume or putting together something on a fix and flip or entrepreneur helps them for the future.
So looking at someone that has done at least starting out a few transactions helps a great deal because they understand. And the other thing that you also do is, beside putting together we'll call an asset-based or hard money loan, you also have the capability to arrange for bank financing. That's the typical long-term FHA conventional financing. So describe a little bit the difference between obtaining – what do you have to do to obtain an acquisition private loan versus a bank qualifying loan?
Like an institutional loan. Well, a lot of times when you're looking at a property, let's say for private money, you've got two or three different issues that typically make it go down that path. As we know, we talked about perfecting the product. It's almost like the metaphor I use a lot is like a car. Well, the car's got an engine, but you and I both know it's drivable, but if it doesn't have doors on it, what's the marketability of that car? So yes, it performs, but can you ultimately get a loan from a credit union or GMAC? So a lot of properties, Mike, as you know, they've been beat up or battered for whatever reason. Sometimes there's some disgruntled borrowers that lost it. Sometimes vandalism. So we really look at the property and start with that, because if there's a house that's available as an REO from a bank or any type of seller, but there's no kitchen in it, or there's no bathroom in it, or there's some electrical things missing, an FHA or conventional lender, and FHA, I'll use that word a lot only because in the world we live in now, pre the meltdown in 08, there really was a lot of what we call non-conforming or subprime type lending loans. But now over 95% of all the conventional financing is FHA. So I'll use FHA a lot. But FHA says, look, we love to lend. Our rates are phenomenal. Right now they're under 4%. You're looking in the threes. But we want that property to be perfected. We want it built. We want the car doors on it. And we've got some minimum standards. So a lot of our fix and flip folks have purchased property that may not have a kitchen in it. That'll probably be a nice, simple example. And at that point, it's like the chicken or the egg, Mike. They've got to control the property in order to do the work on it. But until they close on the property, they can't do the work on it. So in that case, a lot of times we ask them, well, if we work with you on the financing the product, and let's just use some real round numbers, but let's say the acquisition cost is $50,000 is the acquisition cost. And to perfect the product with a new kitchen and a lot of remodeling and updating and a lot of, bathrooms tend to be pretty darn expensive. When it's all said and done, they've got to put another $20,000 in it. So the acquisition cost is $50,000 and the rehab cost is $20,000. A lot of times we'll ask them, well, do you have the rehab money? Do you have the $20,000? Sometimes they say, great, we have the 20, then we're more apt to lend up to 100% of the acquisition of the $50,000. But let's say they say, Bill, we don't have that, but we just got done fixing up another property, and that property is free and clear. So we need $50,000 to buy the home that we're looking at now. We need $20,000 to do the fix-up. And Mike, as you know, you've been around lending for years and years. There's interest and closing costs that also are attached to all these types of instruments. With that said, sometimes we're able to use, let's say, an unrelated piece of property, but add that as additional collateral, and that gives the lender investor more comfort.
Yeah, that I could see that many times where someone will come to me, because I also do some of these hard money loans, and I've always taken the position, and tell me what your thoughts are with your people. I always take the position that if I'm willing to own that property for the amount of the loan, that I'm going to be okay with it. The one thing I don't do is I don't make loans to owner occupants, because I don't want to be in the position of dealing with those hardships. If it's vacant, bank-owned investment property, those are far easier for someone to deal on than dealing with their own personal residence. Is there any difference between you and your investors in regards to personal occupied residence versus non-occupied? And we're talking about only on the acquisition, the private money versus the bank.
On that part, well, as you know, Dodd-Frank has changed the playing field completely, and it's much different than it was in the old world. I'll say the new world. So I do the owner-occupieds, and I'm not saying that there's not a niche. There is a niche, but a lot of owner-occupied people, again, they're great folks, let's say, for instance, and they can qualify for an FHA loan, but the property is in a condition where it truly needs an enormous amount of work. And at that point, a lot of our owner-occupied loans, we are more of a bridge lender. They are owner-occupied. Some people love doing the work. I would say, Mike, majority of the folks do not want to do the work. There are some, I would say maybe 10, maybe 20%. If you took 10 people, most people in America want to be able to move into a product and move right into it and live in it. There's not very many people that are really willing to go through, excuse my French, but the brain damage of buying a property and then working with vendors. That's a whole other process. I'm not saying a lot of them, their intention is to do their own work, but they get excited, and the first weekend is fun, and the second weekend, friends still keep showing up. By the third or fourth weekend, Mike, then I know that friends just don't want to come around and work on your home. So, there's...
Hold on one second. Let's carry this thought over to the next break.
We're always talking business. Talk to an expert. Call now toll free 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network.
At Intuitive Strategies, LLC, we provide services to our clients that help them develop a strong education in business, and we also help them to develop a strategy that will allow them to turn their skills into a profit, protect their business and personal assets, and plan for a successful retirement. Our consulting and structuring services include business analysis, budget analysis, management analysis, ability to raise capital from investors, tax planning to minimize tax liability under code, as well as legal structure to protect business from frivolous lawsuits. Intuitive Strategies also provides document preparation services, such as business structuring documents, documents that establish an entity, management agreements, retirement plans, estate planning, wills, and trusts. Let Intuitive Strategies help you with your business. Visit intuitivestartup.com or call us in Tucson at 520-425-8759. Visit intuitivestartup.com today. Stocks, bonds, investment opportunities, financial news, and talk. We can help. Call us now toll free, 866-472-5790. 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network. You are listening to Strategies for Financial Survival with your host, Michael Figueroa. If you have a question or comment about the program, please send us an email to support@intuitivestartup.com. That's support@intuitivestartup.com. Now, back to Strategies for Financial Survival.
Welcome back, everyone. And I am talking to Bill Anastopoulos, Billy A. And we were talking about the idea of what a potential buyer wants when they're buying a property. And Bill was mentioning how most people do not want to have to deal with fixing up. So you were explaining, the last thing you mentioned was getting tired of having people come over and help out. So go ahead, continue with that.
Well, Mike, again, I'm not saying there's not value in doing your own work, but sometimes when it's all said and done, I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people that are buying a home that really needs some work on it is living in the space while you're doing the work. And you really have to have a huge toleration for it. And if not, it's definitely an experience that most people don't want to go through. But let's push through and say, now the product is, the home is completed. It looks good. What's the exit strategy, Mike? And I think a lot of times in your world, when you're working with flippers, fix and flippers, the exit strategy is a sale. And that's a pretty simple and easy exit strategy. When you're dealing with somebody that's living in the home, owner-occupied, their exit strategy is, hey, they want to live in it. They may want to live in it for some real tax consequences and reasons. And Mike, I know you're an expert in that area, so there's a lot of motivation sometimes to stay in there for a capital gain or take advantage of living in a home and the exclusions that you get. But then you've got to say, all right, now we need to deal with income. And if you're owner occupied, what do you do for a living? Are you W-2? Do you have a pretty, what I would consider a simple life? You work at Target, you work at Raytheon, you're going back and forth to work, you're putting in 40 hours, you're getting a W-2, they're holding back your FICA and FUTA and taxes, and that's a pretty easy calculation to make. The rules have pretty much held for a very long time when it comes to those type of loans. They want you to have 28% has to be for your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and then they don't want you to go over 36% for total obligations. So even in the private world and hard money world, if it's owner occupied, there's still some qualifications. After the first of the year, same types of guidelines. We had a little bit more liberal. We could go up to 50% of someone's income. We're waiting for the new guidelines to come at the end of the month, but give or take, we'll probably be around where FHA is, around 36%. The other big thing is credit report, Mike. There's a lot of great lenders that do FHA. That's not really my forte, but we have a common friend, our friend Carmine Russo over at Guild. He does a great job on FHA loans. And his requirements are sometimes a little bit different than they are at Fairway or at Nova, but give or take, that's a concern in the fact that you need to have a minimum credit score. Some FHA lenders are 680, sometimes are 630, some will allow some real reasons for flexibility. So I think when it's all said and done, that exit strategy that you and I talk about, Mike, I would say on the wholesale side of the business where you tend to gravitate in, the exit strategy is selling it. On the owner-occupied side of the business, Mike, it's what's my exit strategy and how do we help people move through this stuff? You and I both know when it's all said and done, hard money typically is not set up for a longer-term period. Although we've been doing more of them, the loan amounts tend to be a lot smaller. then someone can digest and be able to work through a long-term private loan. But historically, it's more of a bridge loan. How do we get people from point A, get them to point B, then get them over to a nice FHA lender and let them move on?
And in regards to that, I was thinking in regard to the way I do loans, I don't really look at tax returns and credit reports. How important is that to your people that are private lenders versus banks?
Well, I think if we can distinguish again, if it's owner-occupied or non-owner, and that's the huge divide. And I think the listeners are hopefully getting a sense that if it's non-owner-occupied, Mike's, that's a space that you live in and I live in too. I also live in an owner-occupied space. So when we get into an owner-occupied space, that's when tax returns, credit reports, those types of things really matter. Now, they may matter to somebody that's in a non-owner occupied, but Mike, I had a friend of mine pull me aside and he said, a lot of you folks that have been in lending, a lot of us are bruised and battered. We had an old friend, remember Steve Clements,
Yes.
Years and years ago, and he said, Bill, we went through some hard times back in the 80s, and he just said, you see scars on somebody's back, and he said, you got to think of some of those fish, some of those sharks that get in fights and they get beat up and wounded and scarred, So even though the model may have failed in a lot of the things, Mike, that entrepreneurs do, that we did, there was a lot of great people that bought at the end of 05, bought in 06. Even though that model may have failed, the equity is in the person. And I think a lot of times right now, historically, Mike, if you were a private lender, would you rather be a private lender in 2010, 2013, or would you have rather been a private lender in 2005 to 2008?
Well, definitely, I can tell you that I have done loans in 2005 and 8, and of course, the value of the properties were significantly higher, and they've declined by as much as 50% in some neighborhoods. So the shark did get me on some of those, and a couple of fingers and toes went out. So I understand what you're talking about there. One of the other things that I'd like to mention, how many times or how good would a private lender be in regards to, let's say, an acquirer of a property saying, how about a joint venture, Bill? I'll do all the work and I probably can put up some of the renovation money. Will you joint venture with me because I don't want to have to make payments to you and have an obligation that if the project doesn't sell for what I hope it will sell for, that I'm liable for the balance if the property sells for less than what we bought it for. What's your experience, and explain that scenario? That may be something that people may say, that might work for me, but here's the pros and here are the cons on that.
Mike, that is an excellent question and an excellent space, and I'm glad we're really having some time to talk about it, and I'll tell you why. You may get a lot of people who are great connectors, they're diligent, they have the ability to get work done, and yet sometimes, Mike, they need their own money to stay alive and pay their family bills, pay their own bills, but they can show up at a job site, they have some great experience. A lot of times they'll come to me for a loan, and when I'm listening to them and I'm saying, look, I respect where you're coming from, but I want you to know you don't have any skin in the game, and skin is what we came back to that stool example that I had, the equity. I really think you need to be in a joint venture. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, philosophically there's capital and philosophically there's expertise. And if we can bring those two together, then we have a way to make a great transaction. Now, you may not like, the biggest motto, and another mutual friend of ours, Chuck Greenberg, we would always talk about, people would say, I'd rather have a private hard money lender. We're cheaper than a partner. And that historically is a probably fair statement to say. When you do a private loan, that's cheaper than a partner. But when you don't have any money, you're really looking at a joint venture. And then you truly have a partnership. The one thing that I know about you, Mike, is that you're very detail orientated, and I really go forward with folks and say, look, if you want to get into a joint venture relationship, let's have a blueprint. Let's have a map. Let's talk not about where we think this thing's going to sell and why it's always going to sell, but let's talk about the divorce. And I hate to use that metaphor, but let's talk about if things don't go well, if we can't sell it, at what point in time do we say, do you quote unquote tap out? And I think that's a great place. And you've got some friends, some mutual friends, Jeff Utsch, and he works with some other people. And there's some great ways to do joint ventures together. The only thing I would encourage anybody that's out there listening is to kind of have or get in touch with you and put together a blueprint, put together some kind of an agreement, knowing that, obviously you need to perform to do the work. You need to be diligent. You need to show up every day, that person that's putting up that capital. Because in some ways, Mike, I think we can make an argument. The person putting up those funds are at more of a risk than the person doing the work. I think that's a pretty fair thing to say. The other thing that most borrowers or joint venture partners don't realize, that even if someone puts up the money, there's still a cost of capital. Because if that investor didn't put up the money with you, you could have made another private loan to somebody that had a down payment and not have to worry about it. And I think, when it's all said and done, that's the blueprint. That's the footprint in my mind that really needs to be upfront, shown, put down, and that way the expectations. Because you and I both know how many partnerships just get beat up. And then there's some real hurt feelings because the person does all the work, but it doesn't sell for that. Or a buyer comes in and says, great, we're going to buy your product, but by the way, we want you to pay for our closing costs. We want you to do this, this, and this. That type of thing, Mike.
Yeah, I've done a number of these type of joint ventures, as you have mentioned, and I'll tell you a little story that got me into the lending business. Back in 1980, a person came to me and said, if you would put up the money to buy the lot, back then the lot was $10,000, you believe that, and I'll build a house and we'll split the profits 50-50, and you'll make a return of at least 45% based on the fact that we'll have this house sold in 6 months. And of course, in 1980, private money, I guess I'd say the prime rate, I believe, was about 21%.
That's right.
Would you believe that? 21%. You could buy treasury bills at 14% and CDs at 18%. So if I went to one of my private investors and said, would you lend me money? I had to, because this is when I was just starting out, I'd have to give them 25 to 30%. So in my first deal, I said, okay, I'll give you a 30% interest rate on the $10,000. So in 6 months, that'd be $1,500. And of course, I listened to the guy who was building the house, and I was going to make $4,500 or $2,200 profit. So I'd have a little spread there, and that would be my fee putting the deal together. Well, of course, what always happens, the house sold, the costs were higher than what was expected as far as the cost to build a house. The expenses of sale were more, and I wound up with something like a yield of 10% on the money, and I had to pay out of my pocket the other 20% to the investor. So I found that this is not really a good joint venture. So when he came back again and said to me, hey, I got another deal. You put up $10,000, same story, and I'll do the deal, and it's a 45% return. And I said, how sure are you about that 45%? And he said, oh, I guarantee it. And I said, very good. Here's what I'll do. You give me 30% guaranteed, and I get a first mortgage on the property, and you take everything in excess of that. And that way I know that I've got a fixed protection here, and the risk is on you, but you're building the house and you know what you're doing. He says, fine, I'll do that. Of course, what happened at the sale? I got my 30%, and he wound up with nothing pretty much because of, again, the cost overruns and cost of sale. And I said, I like this idea of lending money instead of joint venturing because at least I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get paid. And in the second one, I only had to pay my investor 22% instead of 30%. So I made a real profit out of that. But again, in other situations, when you do partnerships, and I've been through these, and you have been, you have an expectation that one person is going to do X work, the other one's going to do Y work, and inevitably, I'm pretty sure you could explain some situations where somebody gets busy and doesn't do their work, and then you have lawsuits and fights that break out over non-performance by one of the parties on that. So what is your thought on dealing with
I think they're great. I think the challenge is if you're a lender and investor, someone that just approaches you and you say, great, let's move forward. And then that same fixer, flipper, or builder, or spec builder, whatever, role you want to put in that spot, goes to another person like you, Mike, does the same thing. Then he goes to somebody else, does the same thing. And then at what point does your project become a priority, Or
right.
If he ends up using a subcontractor that starts the job, doesn't complete it, or does subpar work, or that work's got to be redone and reworked, all of a sudden now this joint venture fixer flipper doesn't have the resources. And that's when things get extremely uncomfortable. And now he stops working on your job and moves to 2 other jobs, but he's too afraid to tell you the truth. And he says, well, I'll go fix it on another job, and my goal is to make some money, and then I'll come back to your job, Mike, and I'll fix it then when I have some money.
I think that's a big issue, exactly that. And one of the big dangers is when you pay somebody in advance, where they say, okay, give me 50% or 20% or some percentage of the money up front. And if you do that and they don't do the work, what you're talking about inevitably happens. And then if the other subs don't get paid, then mechanics liens are placed on the property, and it could be a nightmare. And one of the things we're going to talk about in another session is how to structure your transaction to protect your property against all of this type of thing. But I'm sorry, Bill, you were
your point is very good and very valid. The other thing that sometimes is difficult, I question sometimes some of these fix and flippers' motivation, and why did they buy that home? And there's no money left. There's no money in this thing, but what motivates them? And getting to know them over the years and years and years, they put an enormous amount of value on keeping a crew, or keeping a crew busy, or putting together the right team. Now, Mike, you and I have been through life, and, years and years ago with my former partner, we built a lot of homes, and next thing you know, we were building homes not necessarily to make money, but maybe sometimes to break even in order to keep a crew. And the business model was incorrect, but we thought, well, if we could do 1 or 2 homes, and if all we're doing is breaking even, then we can keep our crew intact. and therefore starting back up and not starting back up. And you see that with a lot of builders. You take a look at some of these national builders right now. You and I both know they were building homes a year or two ago, and they were losing money, but they had to keep the model going. They had their fixed cost. So sometimes you just shake your head, and if a fix and flipper gets so big that he's just keeping his crews busy, they ultimately bleed him to death. In the meantime, that has really nothing to do with your project other than you just want to get your job done, So
I've seen that many times. In fact, I've seen it recently where somebody was going through that same thing, and you got to be careful not to overextend yourself, because what a lot of people do is they get stuck in the situation. It looks like we have a break that we got to do, so let me go to break, and then let's talk further about this part of it.
Up-to-date business and financial news. Call now and get the financial information you need. 866-472-5790. 866-472-5790. The experts are here. Voice America Business Network. What if you were able to make extra money in your free time? Okay, we hear that all the time. But High Yield is all about finding investment strategies that have proven results. Your hosts, Frank Rolfe and Dave Reynolds, will bring you the insider tips that will help create double-digit yields and give you the quality of life you want, despite a troubled economy. Just keep your mind open and listen every week for High Yield with Frank and Dave, Fridays at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Channel. At Intuitive Strategies, LLC, we provide services to our clients that help them develop a strong education in business, and we also help them to develop a strategy that will allow them to turn their skills into a profit, protect their business and personal assets, and plan for a successful retirement. Our consulting and structuring services include business analysis, budget analysis, management analysis, ability to raise capital from investors, tax planning to minimize tax liability under code, as well as legal structure to protect business from frivolous lawsuits. Intuitive Strategies also provides document preparation services, such as business structuring documents, documents that establish an entity, management agreements, retirement plans, estate planning, wills, and trusts. Let Intuitive Strategies help you with your business. Visit intuitivestartup.com or call us in Tucson at 520-425-8759. Visit intuitivestartup.com today. We're always talking business. Talk to an expert. Call now, toll free, 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network. You are listening to Strategies for Financial Survival with your host, Michael Figueroa. If you have a question or comment about the program, please send us an email to support@intuitivestartup.com. That's support@intuitivestartup.com. Now, back to Strategies for Financial Survival.
Welcome back, everyone, and I am continuing my discussion with Billy A. regarding private financing versus bank financing for your project. So, Bill, let's go to some specifics. What are the comparable fees between what a private investor wants versus what a bank will ask for? And I put a little outline together that explains some of it. This is something that you know by in your sleep, but what generally do you see private investors' yields and conditions be?
Well, I think the reason why, let's just start off with a basic question. People always ask me, and I'm pretty sure they always ask you, why on earth would anybody ever consider a private or a hard money loan versus a bank? And I think when it's all said and done, what value do we bring to the marketplace, Mike? And you're phenomenal at bringing value. I make a living at bringing value. We both must bring value. And I would say the first reason why we exist, and I would have to say, number one, if they say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But I think we bring value in the marketplace because of speed, timing. Banks are great, but tend to be slow to make a decision. Somebody can bring you all the information to you, Mike. You can look at it, analyze it. Maybe, like my first mentor, an old friend of mine, you knew him, Leon Spitzer, go kick the tires. You gotta kick the tires. You and I drive the property, we walk it, next thing you know, we can come back and give someone a pretty good decision. So with that said, I think that's one of the reasons why we exist. Most loans tend to be give or take, we write them for 12 months. You and I both know they tend to pay out within 6 to 8 months. Some private investors want to have a minimum interest. In other words, they just want to have at least 3 months worth of payments. Other investors say, no, we want to have at least 6 months worth of payments. Interest rates, always argue. We're in the middle of this. Mike, we can probably make a good argument. We're always trying to horse trade. There's some investors that, want anywhere between 15 to 18. There's other investors that are willing to look to 10 to 12. I argue with lenders a lot. I'm always arguing with borrowers. In some ways, Mike, we're kind of in this pinball machine. We're constantly being pushed and tugged and turned. But usually 1% a month typically is kind of an easier way to understand something. So if someone wants to borrow $50,000, you can pretty much say you might be at, or give or take, $500 your payment, and that's at 12%. There's some private investors, Mike, that that are, I hate to use that word greedy, but they're a little bit more conscious. My argument, and I'm sure you tell them the same thing, sometimes it's better to get 8 to 10% and keep your money working than charge 12 to 15, and then for 6 months it's not working, and then the other 6 months it is. So, right. That's always. When it comes to fees, Mike, I think we're no different than any other business person. I'm a little nervous about where the government's going and what they will allow you to charge, but there again, that's owner occupied. So, if you charged $1,000 on a $20,000 loan, you just charged 5 points. So on the surface of it, it sounds terrible. You're charged 5 points or 10 points. On the surface, it's terrible, but it's like anything else. You talk to a lot of real estate agents. It takes just as much work to do a $50,000 listing in Pueblo Gardens as it does a $500,000 listing in the foothills. So at some point in time, you end up putting some minimums just because of the time and energy. A lot of attorneys do the same thing.
Now, one thing I'd like to mention is on fees. When I'm looking at transactions like this, when I was the borrower, I remember that the important factor was I'm buying with almost no money down, pretty much, and I'm hopefully going to flip it for a profit within a short time. So the yield that I may be making might be an 80 or 90% yield if I'm really lucky. So if I'm taking a, quote, partner that's not legally a partner, it's really a lender, and I'm paying them 12 plus 5 points, let's say. So effectively, I'm sharing that profit. If I look at it that way, that's not a big deal because I wouldn't make my profit if I did not have that lender there. And I think that's an important thing because a bank will not make a loan if you don't qualify. They don't do spec loans. They don't do loans based on equity. They look at, as you pointed out, what your earnings are, what salary you got, what liquidity you have, and all of those conditions for a lot of people that are starting out trying to make a business out of the fix and flip don't have that capability. So I think that you really got to study the fee structure based on a partner getting the fees versus you're doing it solo, and you can't compare bank with a private lender. And that come up to the other part of personal guarantees. So do you want to explain a little bit to people?
Well, you are really the expert in it, but a personal guarantee, which most private lenders want, ultimately gives them a little bit more comfort and ultimately allows that lender to decide which approach, if there is a default. And personal guarantees is probably the best way to put it, is it really puts the focus on the borrower to say, not only did I pledge the property, but I have a personal guarantee. You can spend an hour talking about the ramifications if you don't put your spouse on one, or if you do, that's a whole other discussion. But bottom line is that helps the lender put that borrower on notice, especially on a leveraged transaction like you're talking about, Mike, to stay focused and to be attentive to make sure that that loan gets paid off. So a personal guarantee, I would say, is more like a blanket. It just covers the property, but it also covers other assets that that borrower may have, and it focuses that borrower to stay, in my mind, laser focused to make sure that that debt gets paid.
Very good. I think that is a very good point there. Now, do you see where people will borrow against home equity lines and credit cards in order to do these fix-ups? And what advice do you have for people in regards to doing that type of arrangement? And also when they borrow money or get their family members involved and friends, because the old story is never borrow from your friends or family, because if you don't pay the money back, you won't have the friend and won't have the family member either.
No, there's no doubt about most relationships are strained. I've always been a fan of the home equity line. I think that's a great tool. You and I both know in the old world, it was a phenomenal tool. The new world, lenders have shortened them, tightened them down. But the fact that you're able to go in and out, a lot of my borrowers may tap that line of credit and use that money for the fix-up. And then all I do is lend on the property. And in some ways, I just prefer to lend on the property. To do draws and go back and forth on, performance, it takes more managing. In some ways, I keep using the word, it's a lot of brain damage. I think credit cards, if they're used constructively, are phenomenal, especially ones that there's a couple of fix and flips. They have a great account at Home Depot. They use it like crazy. They get pretty good pricing. They love the miles on it. I've got a couple flippers that just say, hey, I charge everything. This is great. So I think if you can use the card, but then when the house sells, you got to pay the card off. So, as long as you're using that approach, I think plastic is phenomenal. But like a lot of other people, back in the old world, they were using them and then everything seized and they lost that privilege. So now everybody's on debit. So, there's a lot of changes that's happened in that world, but I truly believe if it's used constructively, plastics and lines of credit are phenomenal, because at that point you're not really paying escrow fees or fee points and closing costs. And I want to make sure before we leave, Mike, to also focus that all the loans that we do for private lenders, and I know you're in the same boat, all use account servicing. In other words, we have a third non-interested party that essentially does the account servicing. The borrower makes the payment to the title company makes the payment to the investor. At the end of the year, everybody gets their 1099s, 1098s. If someone wants to go pay something off, Mike, you probably had an experience like this. I had an investor go to Europe on a cruise. The property sold, and next thing you know, we had a real issue because that particular investor was, over the pond. He was in Europe, and we couldn't get that lien released. We figured it out. It cost a lot of money to FedEx and back, but when it's all said and done, I'm a huge proponent of account servicing. There's 2 or 3 great title companies here in town that do a phenomenal job. So that's just me and my little stump.
Now, I think for sure a situation like that, I've been faced with that, and you absolutely do want to set up an account servicing situation with a company precisely because of that. And there are times, too, that people either die or they go to the hospital and they need to you need to have access to release. And so that is a critical item. Now, we're coming to the close of our session this day. And Bill, I want to thank you very much for being here, and I'd like you to once more tell everyone how to contact you, phone and web page.
You bet. My phone number again, you can either call or text 520-299-4878. My website is billya.com, BILLYA.com. Mike, thank you so much. It's just been an honor to be on the show, and any way that I can be of value, of service to your listeners, I'm here for you. Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you. And I want to stress to people that Billy does both hard money loans and conventional lending, and he's got experience all over the state of Arizona to do this. So thank you again, and we shall see you at our next show when that comes about. Thank you.
Thank you again for tuning in to Strategies for Financial Survival. Please join host Michael Figueroa again next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Channel. Until the next show, survive and succeed.
Thanks again for listening to the preceding program brought to you on the Voice America Business Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericabusiness.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the preceding program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.